here today in Amsterdam Museum. Welcome. We're here in their Panorama collection, which is a collection of the vibrant history of Amsterdam, as well as their Collecting the City exhibition, where right now Gay Games is presented. I am Sierra. I will give a tour through these collections today. From my perspective as a queer person of color. And why I was invited is because I have Bar Bario, which is a bar in the center of Amsterdam, which is a safer space for the queer community, the community of color, where we can come together, have a drink, enjoy each other's company, see each other, and where we also have exhibitions as well. Our first stop is this painting of the Dam by Johannes Lingelbach. This was painted in 1565, if I'm correct. And you see Amsterdam already in this year, already as a vibrant, multicultural city, although that's not represented in this painting. Amsterdam has already always been a multicultural city. The Regent Flores made sure of that when he gave special privileges to private companies as well as entrepreneurs, whatever their origin was, to do trade and business in Amsterdam. So that showed early signs of a sort of tolerant ruling class, even though that tolerance was only for the betterment of Amsterdam and not for these people. It was to create a sort of world center of trade in Amsterdam. That was their goal. So in these years, there were already early signs of, for example, Black people that traveled here because Amsterdam was so active in the Atlantic world. They traveled to Brazil, Indonesia, Africa, and often these people also came here. You already have signs of them in the Middle Ages, but of African people, for example, the earliest signs are in baptisms or marriage licenses and other official notary deeds. So Amsterdam was always already this multicultural place, as well as being a sort of religiously tolerant place, which resulted in Spanish people moving here, Portuguese people, French Huguenists, and always already Jewish people that fled for freedom and safety in Amsterdam. So there were already a lot of different communities here. At the same time, homosexuality was deemed sodomy. So sodomy is oral or anal sex. And that became illegal in these times as well. So people would be stoned or burned to death if they found out that they acted upon these, well, what was then very devilish acts. Even though these people were here, even though we know that these Black and brown people were here, but also, for example, people with disabilities, you do not see them presented in this painting. In this painting, you only see the white elite, basically, because in those times, only the white elite could afford to have themselves be painted, or the government would order a painting and they wouldn't want that vision of Amsterdam to be shown. And for me, that really connected to how I see Amsterdam today, which is still such a vibrant and multicultural city, but where is that representation and who represents us? You see very strong colors of orange, which is the color of the Netherlands, which is our national color. So you see that this painting was made to show the pride we have in Amsterdam, but at the same time, you don't see the skin colors of those people that created that city to be proud of. And that very much connected to my nowadays feelings for Amsterdam. For me, I see so much potential in this city. I almost see the same potential that Regent Flores saw in those days. As such a multicultural city, as a haven, as such an easily accessible city. And I do see that this diversity is here. In my bar, after 2 years now, I've been open, I see all these different identities flowing through, coming in and out, and we are here. There's just not that much space for us here. So although I see where our problems lay, in that we are underrepresented and often also under-supported. I do see that potential that we could be. I do see that beauty in our community, and also the potential that Amsterdam could have to actually feed these souls and actually nurture the creativity that all of the city and all of the souls in the city hold. This is a painting of Elizabeth Samson. Elizabeth Samson was a woman that lived in Suriname. She was born in 1715. As I just said, during these times, the white elite could only afford to be portrayed, so we don't have a lot of visuals of what the other side of Amsterdam or the other side of this world trade looked like. So here we have one portrayal of what Elizabeth Samson may have looked like. We don't know what she actually looks like. And behind this painting are two other portrayals that we'll get to later. Elizabeth Samson was born in 1715. She was born to an enslaved mother and a white plantation owner father. Her siblings were bought free, and they in turn bought their mother free, making her a free-born black woman in Suriname in 1715. She was very proud of this. Amongst other things, she's a very interesting figure. She got quite close to the white elite because of her half-sister, Maria. And she learned how to do maths, how to write, and how to do business, and she was very good at this. She became a very good businesswoman, and she had a couple of plantations herself, making her a black slave owner herself, actually. And she became famous because she wanted to marry a white man, which was not allowed in those times. But she traveled to the Netherlands, made her case, and in the end she was allowed to, because there was actually no official legislation that made this illegal. But a different lawsuit that she had I found more interesting, which was that she heard a merchant talk very badly about the governor's wife in Suriname. So she made note of this to the authorities. She told the authorities what had happened, but because no one else had seen this happen, there was no proof of it. But the governor was still very upset that this had happened at all. So he wanted to blame someone, and he blamed Elizabeth Samson in the end. And in his words, he said it was typical of these black people to do this, especially free black people, because they held this hatred and this misbehavior toward white people. So even though she was rich, the racism was still stronger than what her elitism could buy off. She was banned from her colony, but again, she traveled to the Netherlands with a lawyer, made her case, and she could travel back to Suriname and continue living there. Another interesting fact is that she became a millionaire in 1765, which is about a century before legendary Madam C.J. Walker, who was the first woman millionaire in America. And she is very well known in America, but I personally have never heard of Elizabeth Samson, so I found that very interesting, although questionable, very interesting that she was a millionaire in those times already. So this is Pauline, painted by Ken Dorson. Pauline is holding her manumission, which is a paper that she was bought free. Ken Dorson made a series of paintings like these with people holding manumissions. Again, we know these people existed, these manumissions, these papers still exist, but we don't know what they look like. So Ken Dorson decided to create characters, to create figures to add onto these papers and these manumissions to give a face to what these people look like. And I think that's very important, because where you can see on the other side of this exhibition so many faces of white regents and merchants, our history is just as important and just as deserving to be represented. Pauline was bought free by Jan Houthakker, who was bought free as well, and in turn, before emancipation, before the abolishment of slavery even started, bought 129 other enslaved people free. So I think that is a very important part of history, to tell that it wasn't the Dutch that freed us, but that we already started our freedom ourselves, our path to emancipation ourselves. My heritage, I myself, I was born on Curaçao. and I'm also Surinamese Indian. So although I cannot relate fully to the Surinamese enslaved history, I do have the Caribbean enslaved history within me. And I appreciate what Amsterdam Museum tried to do here. They tried to shine a positive light on these black and brown bodies instead of the light that usually represents these people in those times, which are abused bodies, which are objects and often ownership not over themselves but by other people. And here I've shown two proud black women, again one more questionable than the other, but still people that were freed, that had hopefully their own life and could decide for themselves. And I think that is also a very important part to show that we were not only enslaved, that we were not only objects working for Amsterdam's greater good, but we were also people ourselves. As I said before, I really appreciate the positive light that Amsterdam Museum has tried to put these three women in and not objectify them. But at the same time, I do miss a little bit of that negative history that Amsterdam has. I do miss a little bit of the representation of how dark it actually was, how abusive and how much blood has been lost to create this Amsterdam that we are so proud of today. This is an example of that darkness. She was taken from Suriname to work as a housemaid, but her owners found her to have bad behavior, so much so that they sent her to prison just for being a young black girl that maybe didn't want to work for them, you know? So this is an example of that dark history, although not represented in that way. And she was photographed here in the modern light, again, because we don't have any other representation of what these people may have looked like. But still, what I miss a little bit in this figure, in this portrayal, is the show of abuse, this dark side, to really have visualized how bad it was for these people in those times. She's almost portrayed as if she was taken in as one of their own, which she certainly wasn't. She was wearing like this beautiful dress and sitting at the dinner table, I imagine, like with them, sort of, with the beautiful painting in the back. But reality is that that wasn't the case at all, and she probably was tucked away somewhere in a back room and abused, and it didn't look like this, I think, at all. Sarah de Zwart was born in 1861, and I'm excited to finally tell a queer part of Amsterdam's history. I think this is maybe one of the first queer imageries in this exhibition right now, if we follow the timeline. Sarah de Zwart, as I said, was born in 1861. She was a sculptor and she was an art collector. She moved through very famous artists' surroundings. She was painted here by Breitner, for example, but also Van Gogh and Rodin speak about her and have letters in exchange with her. Besides that, there was one painter that was especially infatuated with her, Carson. He was told about Sarah being the muse of the 80s. She was painted by many other painters besides Breitner. And Carson became infatuated with her, but she did not respond to his advances. Later he found out that was because she was actually a lesbian and she had a partner already. So he went on to slander her and her partner. He even pulled her in front of a court and had a 3-hour plea about how she would have to be found guilty. I think because Sarah did come from a rich family and she already moved through these artists' surroundings, which sort of maybe accepted that she was different, just like them. She was acquitted, so she was not found guilty, and she went on to travel the world with her partner Emily. She went to Paris, to Indonesia, to England, and many other places. She is not represented much elsewhere, except for in these images that these male painters made of her. And I think that's very sad because in her I see a very rich story. I mean, I love that in those times she was traveling around with her partner. I would love to be here. And it seemed like sort of maybe her financial freedom could buy her freedom elsewhere, just like Elizabeth Samson had. She could do business because she had money, and she could travel back and forth to the Netherlands and have a lawyer that fought for her. Same could Sarah de Zwart, travel around, live her life as she wanted it. At the same time, this representation is not from her eyes, but only from the male gaze. She did make a lot of artwork, she did make sculptures, but there are only 2 of them in Dutch museums, and they're both safely tucked away in basements. But we do have this painting of Breitner of her. Yes, so we have a little corner of gender and sexual freedom. Black Pride is a grassroots organization and social justice movement for the LGBTQIA community of color and for the Black LGBTQIA+ community. Black Pride wanted to join Amsterdam Pride at some point, but they were told to be too political and there wasn't any space for them. So Black Pride created their own space, and I very much connected to that, as I also could not find any space for myself. I opened Bar Bario. Besides that, I see a lot of other resemblance in Bar Bario and Black Pride. You see a coffin here, which presents all of the Black and brown bodies, queer bodies that have passed away due to the violence that they have to endure. But besides that, Black Pride also very much centers joy and healing. And I think that is a very important part of not only our history, but also our future, that we don't only focus on trauma, but that we also focus on celebrating ourselves and our beautiful, diverse identities. Black Pride does that every year during their Pride event by doing a healing, but also Hall of Heathens, which is a sort of kink sex party for Black and queer people to meet each other. And Bar Bario does that by organizing events and exhibitions so people can see themselves, show themselves, and share their stories in positive ways as well. The last thing that I find very important about Black Pride is what Avia Velbrief, one of their organizers, said in an interview actually last week, is that in Black Pride you see Black leadership, and that is something you don't see elsewhere, not in politics, but not in the Netherlands generally. You don't see a lot of Black leadership. And on top of that, you don't only see Black leadership, but you see women in Black leadership, and you see trans Black leadership. And that is such an important story to tell. And I hope that together with Black Pride, Bar Bario can become and continue to show the story of Black leadership, of Black creativity, of queer joy, of Black queer joy, and that we can continue to invest in our futures. Above me is the sign of Het Mandje, which I personally find amazing that we have a sign of a bar in a museum. Could have never imagined that that was a historical part of Amsterdam and that it's actually a part of a museum collection. As a bar owner myself, I can only dream that my sign is somewhere in a museum in the future. Het Mandje was, I think, the first recorded gay bar in Amsterdam. Bet van Beeren opened it in 1927. She was openly lesbian herself, driving around on motorcycles, often with a different woman on the back, in leather jackets. I can only imagine being a young girl, or maybe even a man or whatever else, in those times, and seeing her doing whatever she wants, seeing her on that motorcycle, so different than any other woman in that time, and being like, wow, can I be her? So I think she was an iconic representation of what you could be. Het Mandje, she took it over from her uncle and called it Het Mandje because her mom would bring her a little basket of food every day. Het Mandje means a basket. And after the Second World War, it became especially famous. During the war, she was a part of the resistance. She would hide weapons in Het Mandje, and she would also hide people, actually. And after that, she was called the Queen of the Zeedijk. The Zeedijk is the street where Het Mandje is on. Bet van Beeren, another fun fact about her that I also connected to as a bar owner myself, used to have to bottle beers for her mom. Her mom had a hostel, so the kids would have to bottle beers for the hostel. And to do that, Bet van Beeren had to suck on a hose that was connected to the keg where the beer was in, which resulted in her often coming to school drunk. And after that, Bet van Beeren still loved alcohol to the end of their days. And when I just opened Bar Bario myself, I would always say, like, I opened this for my love of inclusivity, for my love of creativity, and for my love of booze. So I personally connected to that story of Bet van Beeren loving a little bit of booze herself. The bar was iconic in many ways, although she didn't allow people to kiss in the bar because there were still very strict laws. She did allow them to do it on Queen's Day, where everyone could dance with everyone and everyone could sneak a kiss with everyone. Another iconic remembrance that she left behind is the word het uiltje. Do you know that word? It's the owl in English. When someone would walk in that Bet van Beeren thought looked a little bit sketchy, like they could be homophobic or they could be an undercover policeman, she would light a porcelain owl at the bar to alert the rest of the guests in the bar. And still till this day, we call heterosexual people an owl sometimes, which is amazing that she left so much behind of her memory. After Bet van Beeren passed away, she wanted to be laid out on her pool table in the bar. So she was laid out there for a couple of days, actually, for the guests to see her one last time. I thought that was another iconic move of hers. Overall, I think she was a very unique person. If it was then or today, she would still be very unique. Unfortunately, her sister had to take it over then, and it was quite hard. I can also relate to that. Owning a bar is quite hard work. So they had to close. But in 2020, I think, Zeedijk NV bought it over and they appointed new leaders. And their mission is to keep it open for 100 more years. I always saw Amsterdam as such a diverse place. I always saw Amsterdam as having a lot of cultures, whether that be ethnicities or just social identities in cultures. But myself, I could rarely find them. I worked in bars myself since I was 15, and I rarely served people that looked like me or worked with people that looked like me. So my initial thought opening Bar Bario was create a space for people like me and hopefully other identities that couldn't find themselves presented elsewhere as well. So that is my main base idea for Amsterdam, to be a samkroeg, you know, a regular bar like Het Mandje probably was in her time. But then for all of these other identities that can't find themselves in the Reguliersdwarsstraat or in other queer bars, so for queer people of color to find themselves here and to meet themselves and have an easy drink in a safer environment. There's a beautiful connection between Het Mandje and the gay games. As I said, Het Mandje had to close after her sister took it over. It was quite difficult. But in 1998, during the gay games, they opened for a week and Het Mandje was revived just as it was before. People were dancing, it was filled up for the whole entire week, and it was left in the exact same state that Bet van Beeren left it in. So that is a beautiful connection, and at the end of this tour, as my last stop, I'll tell more about the gay games. Right now we are at their temporary exhibition, the Gay Games, which was sort of an Olympic Games that was organized in 1998 in Amsterdam, but then for gay and queer people. When I first walked into this exhibition, I felt a sort of feeling of euphoria. I mean, these walls are filled with masses and masses of people, queer people that are filling up Amsterdam, that are filling up their public spaces, their parks, their arenas, and I could almost feel their joy being surrounded by themselves so much and seeing themselves represented so wildly. When I saw this, I was like, wow, can we do this right now? For me, it looks beautiful, but as I walk through, there are some portraits on the wall here as well that tell stories of people that have been here. And they all tell different stories, some of them wildly enthusiastic, some of them still very happy because this is an amazing story regardless, but there was some problems in underrepresentation. And I could already recognize that from the name itself, the Gay Games. Throughout this tour, I've dropped the word queer quite often already. But queer is basically an umbrella term for all LGBTQIA plus identities. It was once a slur that meant weird, but it was reclaimed after that to become this umbrella term. And gay, for me and for a lot of other people, is a bit of a binary term. It sounds for people that love the same sex, which doesn't really include people that are gender fluid, that don't conform to these gender binaries where you can only be a man and love a man or be a woman and love a woman. And it is also not inclusive, for example, for bisexual or pansexual people that don't only love the same sex or gender, but love all sorts of people. So because of the name, I already immediately recognized, okay, maybe it wasn't as inclusive as it was showed. Still, I think it must have been such a beautiful event. So I'd like to tell more about it. Behind me are some posters of the gay games. As I said before, it was this week event, I think, filled with different sports games, but also filled with free events and exhibitions, as well as for some sports games that were actually for people with disabilities. They also had talks for people that were deaf. So they did invest a lot in trying to make it inclusive. But as you see behind me, there was still only one forum that was overrepresented and other people that were underrepresented. As you can see behind me, there's a lot of representation of white gay men. And that is the story that a lot of the people that went there that were of color told as well. Although they did see for the first time other queer people of color, even from different countries, there were even some African queer people of color that joined in. They were wildly underrepresented in comparison to, and they still had to deal with some racism and discrimination during these gay games. At the same time, some people didn't agree with putting different countries against each other like you usually do with the Olympic Games, because they couldn't see the solidarity in that. And I think what the idea was of these gay games was to show that solidarity that queer people have with each other, because if there's something that transcends borders, it's this queer identity that people everywhere have and feel and have to struggle with. So it wasn't very comparative to put them up against each other. They wanted to have it more connected to each other. At the same time, trans people could join in whichever category they wanted to join, which is a beautiful sight to see. And still, when I look around here, I would love to have this nowadays. I would love, with these additions of identities that we have nowadays that we can proudly show, I would love to fill up parks, I would love to fill up arenas, because trans people of color usually can't even walk around the street feeling safe. So imagine them filling up parks and filling up the streets and over-representing themselves for a week long, because representation is not only important for the people to see themselves in other people, for people to meet themselves, to know that they are not alone. I think representation is also very important for people that have never met these identities, to know that we exist, that we are out here, and that we're not going to leave, so you might as well get used to us, right? I think you have to make people a little bit uncomfortable to make any kind of change. And I think the gay games made a lot of people uncomfortable, but also showed how beautiful that change can be. So I hope maybe next year we can do the same.